Serious. Currently, what is the greatest threat to humanity? Water security. The reliable availability of an acceptable quantity and quality of water for health, livelihoods and production, coupled with an acceptable level of water-related risks. Wiki. Water security. The availability of clean drinking water is just one part of water security. Domestic use is 10% of total. We need secure water supply for industry and agriculture, and each sector has its own challenges relating to supply logistics and contamination tolerances. We cannot bottle our way out of this problem. Do we have the right amount of water where we need it? Is it acceptable quality? And is it doing what we want it to do? Here are some examples of threats to water security. Loss of land rights for indigenous people to own, use, develop, and control their waters. War plus military industrial complex plus mass displacement of people plus competition for scarce water resources. Mismanagement plus corruption of water authorities and private utility providers. Pollution plus contamination by industry. Pollution plus contamination from consumer waste. Cumulative effects of microplastics. Agricultural runoff plus eutrophication. Salinization and the diminishing marginal utility of desalination. Depletion of aquifers. Deforestation. Desertification. Clearing plus development in catchment areas. Loss of wetlands and biofiltration. Loss of topsoil, soil water storage and decline in soil biodiversity. Decline in health and function of marine and freshwater ecosystems plus loss of ecosystem services. Observable trends in ocean warming plus acidification. Observable trends in ice melt and sea level rise. Floods, droughts, fires and other natural disasters affecting the water supply. Water as a vector for disease plus pathogens. We haven't even considered climate change yet. Climate change will act as a force multiplier for nearly all these processes. What can we do? Support land and water rights for First Peoples. Invest in forest management and ensure adequate reserves of forested areas. No trees equals no soil equals no rain. Restore plus regenerate catchments, wetlands, and river systems. Allocate sufficient environmental flows. Support farmers to adopt regenerative agricultural practices. Demand closed cycle materials for consumer goods plus packaging. Grow a lot of seaweed and other amazing algae. A lot heaps mate. Be imaginative, be open-minded, be compassionate. Think back. Cradle to cradle smash the state and eat the rich. The rapidly approaching threat of humanity returning to a pre-antibiotic era or entering a post-antibiotic era due to abusive use of antimicrobials coupled with a rapid reduction of discovery and a lack of currently approved alternative approaches. Edit. You can look at it as entering a post-antibiotic era or returning to a pre-antibiotic era. One and the same really in this situation. The ocean slowly dying. Once that ecosystem collapses, we won't be able to feed ourselves. Governments will crumble pretty quickly. As far as rapid extinction level events, the three most destructive threats are cosmic disruption, comet, asteroid, sustained solar flare, change in lunar orbit, all unlikely, but could do anything from vaporize the planet to render half the world's population, crops, and technology useless. Airborne, contagious lethal virus could come about at any time, and, if it had an incubation period of, potentially, 7 days, could spread to 6 continents within 24 hours before even being detected. We tend to presume that modern medicine can overcome or contain all threats to public health. This may not always be the case. When carried out to infinity, nature will get in some good hits on humanity. Let's not forget there are people who dedicated their lives to coming up with the most lethal hybrids of the worst biological threats known to man. Thus far, these threats have remained contained. Global thermonuclear war. We are past the era of duck and cover, but there are systems in place that would mean even an accidental nuclear launch or a rogue attack by a terrorist group that commandeered a remote missile launcher could start a chain reaction, because our command and control systems are obstinate, self-reliant and still on hair trigger alert. If all warheads were used with mass casualties as the goal, half the world's population would die within hours. Many of the remaining half would likely die within the next decade due to radioactive fallout and a breakdown in food distribution systems. Everything described is unlikely, but we indeed have made enough warheads to decimate humanity if we wish. More gradual changes. The end of fertility. There are an increasingly high number of men and women of good health who are otherwise unable to have children. Some argue this is a result of gradual increased exposure to radiation, from flying to computer use. If this trend continues at this pace, for centuries, we may see an era where humanity is simply unable to have enough children to sustain itself. Weather or agricultural disruption, drastic changes to precipitation, pH levels, or amount of sunlight due to more or less cloud cover in specific regions could alter global food production networks such that we'd see mass starvation and perhaps wars over everything from water to arable land. Theosocial revolution, if global charismatic protected leader or leaders arose and gained worldwide followers, preaching that our creator wanted us to either kill all non-believers or persuaded the population that suicide was essential to salvation, humanity could ultimately eliminate itself, we would have a problem. Artificial intelligence is also worth monitoring, but I have yet to see any evidence of a system that could achieve singularity or become self-aware to the point of wanting to destroy humanity before humanity stopped it. Biodiversity loss, closely followed by nuclear weapons and global warming. I think people underestimate the problem that biodiversity loss is. Climate change is a huge problem, but I think biodiversity loss is even more problematic. There is a total collapse of insect populations, and we begin to see a huge decline in bird populations. Other species will 100% be impacted, and I don't want to admit it, but it'll sooner or later impact food production, and that's where people will realize that shit hit the fan. OFC if we manage to find new sources of oil, so that we can attain +6 deg.C by 2100, climate change will be a bigger problem. Unless we mitigate it with a nuclear winter. And basically all our major problems can be summed by one word: greed. Willful ignorance. The demonization of experts and academics to the extent that people are congratulating themselves for being uneducated. The fact that people don't trust scientific evidence anymore. Antibiotic resistance and companies not researching new antibiotics because it's not profitable. Nuclear war. Noon takes it serious, and that's exactly why it's scary. Multiple treaties are cancelled or soon to be cancelled. INF. New START. Treaty on Open Skies, etc. Privatization of our inner life and everyday move by surveillance capitalism. Privatization of our DNA. A global financial crisis much worse than 2008, because this time it will hit China also. And of course, the impending environmental apocalypse. Poor critical thought skill, ignorant individual, hive mind, idiotic society, loss of freedom, starting with freedom of speech. Have you read Fahrenheit 451? I often revisit this old fav of mine. It's interesting to see that this book does not really depict a dire totalitarian regime that forbids and burns books. It's about a society that has become so ignorant, manipulated and stupid that it's the very own citizens who start finding books offensive and ask the gov to burn and forbid them. Of course, the gov obliges. Kumbavicha volcano on Canary Islands is probably the most pressing threat that nobody talks about. We don't talk about it, but an eruption and the subsequent collapse of the volcano into the ocean would, according to some scientific studies, generate a mega tsunami that would wipe out most cities on the Atlantic coast. Excess consumption of resources vs the planet's ability to produce and recover. We consume more than we can produce, which means any disaster could tip the scales into a deficiency. Too much and you would get a collapse without compensation. Weaponizing bipartisan issues in every country, making everything a "team sport" rather than a shade of grey. People would vote for the worst thing on earth just to be on the winning side. The average person has no understanding that there are more bots on the internet than people. That every interaction serves only to make them more pliable to the will of whoever pulls the strings that day. Humans themselves are the greatest threat to humanity. We can create entire civilizations in years, maybe even decades, but it only would take us a few months to destroy it, especially with the technological advances we have made over the past few years. Coronal mass ejection striking the earth. I think a lot of our infrastructure isn't designed to handle it, and even just a few days of power and internet going out across the civilized world could wreck us as a society. Bees and other insects are dying off it faster than we've seen in decades, and never at this rate. A recent study found that we've had a 98% decline in ground insects over 35 years in the Puerto Rican rainforests. In the higher portions of tree canopies there has been an 80% lost in insects. For reference, if we lost 80%, 98% of humans in Puerto Rico, the population would fall from about 3,200,000 million to between 64,000 and 640,000 people. We've also lost 58% of butterfly species in English farmlands. Same idea as above. Imagine if we lost 58% of people in England. The population would plummet from about 56 million people currently to about 23,520,000 people. The drop in butterflies happened over a 9-year period. Imagine 32 million people dying in England over a 9-year period.